Okay, so welcome everyone to our last panel of the day, entitled The Middle Ages in Popular and Digital Media, Politics and Representation. Again, some basic housekeeping rules. Each one of our panelists is going to have 20 minutes to present. Then we will have a half an hour for Q&A. If you have any questions, you can write them in the chat, or if you prefer to ask your question directly, just raise your hand and we will unmute you so you can ask it directly. So we have three very interesting papers for our final panel of the day. Our first panelist is Debojyoti Dan. He's been working, and I'm sorry, I'm going to butcher this name, but I try my best to not do that. In Nava Baligunge Mahavidyalaya since 2009.
Yes.
It's
college. You can say college. It's a Bengali name for the college.
Okay. I hope that was not too bad. He has a special interest in modern and postmodern literature and theories. He learned French initially from the Ramakrishna Mission, and then pursued further diplomas in French from the French Alliance in Bengal. He has several publications to his credit, including a book of poems, Enigma of Red Shadows. He was awarded the first prize in the World French Poetry Competition known as Le
Printemps de Poésie. Printemps de Poésie.
2007. He had worked with the French Alliance of Bengal as a cultural coordinator in the Cine Club from 2007 to 2009. His paper is entitled Medieval Political Histories and Their Unconscious Implications in a Centralized Empire. So Dan, the floor is all yours.
Okay, it was a real pleasure to be selected in this space, and it was kind of a surprise for a presenter to be who is more well versed in the nuances of postmodernism to present a paper in medieval. So I tried not to use too many jargons. I tried to keep the things as simple as possible. Anyway, so the title of my paper is Medieval Political Histories and Their Unconscious Implications in a Song of Ice and Fire, a novel which was popularized by HBO version of it in the screen, and in the textual version of it exists in the writings of Martin. So next slide. So I would like to start with the collective unconsciousness. The Jung's notion of the collective unconsciousness ranges from a passive repository that records the history of all human reactions to the world of an active substratum, that is, the ground out of which all reality emerges. The components of the collective unconscious were first said by Jung to be primordial or ancestral images, and later archetypes that manifest in consciousness through images, strong effects, and behavioral patterns. So when we are looking into this on-stage production, or rather the screen production of Game of Thrones, which moves from the textual space of Martin of 21st century into the space of medievalism, we see a kind of collective unconsciousness being adapted by him and by the HBO conductor of the series, Ryan Kondo and David Weiss. And we see this idea of medievalism that is there, both in the screen version as well as in the textual version, is a formative of the collective unconsciousness of Jung, which I have read out. And the Old English ideas of that came from Beowulf and to the other sagas, which I will talk about, forms a substantial background on which Martin has forged his idea of Game of Thrones, Song of Ice and Fire. So Beowulf, who was is the Old English heroic epic, that was the first Old English heroic epic in England. Beowulf, the most substantial surviving Old English epic, refers back to an age of monster slaying in Scandinavia. Just as Martin invokes the era of always winter in both time and space, and the White Walkers as well as dragons are the elements of archetypal fear in the collective unconsciousness. Just as Beowulf's original audience must have shared a mixed culture, one which readily responded to an ancestral pagan world, and one which also recognized the relevance of primitive heroism to a Christian society. The audience of the present 21st century are in kind of similar mixed in their pagan ideas of heroism and the Christian values. And therefore, it was not very difficult in the collective unconsciousness to relate the medieval ethics, the medieval ideas, and the archetypes of fear, archetypes of fighting dragons and the dragon slayers, and the archetypes of castles, archetypes of blades, that is swords. All these are kind of come down to us in our archetypal ideas through the textuality of Martin and through the performative spaces of HBO's version of Game of Thrones on screen. And thus, both the works are strongly linked to the Germanic roots of English nations, allowing us to experience at first hand what is primordial, elemental, and primitively powerful in the Teutonic world, bringing us face to face with the collective unconsciousness of the Anglo-Saxon period by returning to the dark beginnings in an age-long antecedence to it. So this is the maps which I have tried to find out. So on left side, you have the map of Westeros as Martin provides. So at the top, we have a land of always winter. And then we have the north. Then we come across the main place, which is called Westeros. And on the other side, we have the Iron Islands. Below, we have the Riverlands. I think the map is visible. Yeah. And finally, we reach, and at the end, we have dawn. Now, what I tried to do in the right-hand side, the right-hand side one is not the original map of Martin. It is a map of present Europe, and I tried to link that if Westeros is regarded as a fictive form of Europe, parameters, Greenland looked upon the description of Green or the topology of land, recollect the idea that is the north of the wall. Voice breaking.
Debojyoti, sorry, we are kind of losing you. Maybe your connection is not very stable. Maybe it's better if you turn off your camera to make the connection more stable.
Okay, my voice is losing.
Yeah, it was very much.
Now is it all right?
Now it's
or
better.
shall I switch? Better?
let's give it a try, and if anything, then it would be better.
Okay, please inform me if my voice is breaking, huh? Please.
Right.
Okay. Okay. So this is the map that I tried to inculcate by trying to say that Scotland, the present Scottish topography is very much recollection of the north, and then we have the Norway. Then we have Germany, Switzerland as the reach, the England as the place of where the Lannisters reside, and the France. I have tried to find out that there is a topological connection with the reach and the Wales, and finally the Spain as a dawn. So I tried to use the map of the present European version to try and find out about the connection. Now, very important point here is the medieval literature, starting from the Arthurian legends to the legends that followed of Gawain and the Green Knight, Percival. We have the identity of fear. So fear is a very important element that is present in the medieval literature, and the heroes are supposed to fight with terrors and fears and try to overcome. That's where they become heroes. So Martin's archetype of fear is the White Walkers. Okay, so White Walkers are described in the book as somebody, which I think the quote is enough. I'm not going to read through the quote. Is my voice all right or breaking? Is it fine? Can you hear me?
I hear you fine. Don't worry. If it starts breaking, we will let you know. Don't worry about it.
Okay. So this is the quotation that I tried to take from the book, where the White Walkers are marked as others. They are marked as cold things, dead things, and something that hated the touch of sun. So so these White Walkers are difficult to kill. They are very difficult to kill, and one of the things that can kill them is Valerian steel. So on left we have the famous long claw, a Valerian steel that actually Jon Snow uses to kill one of the White Walker. In middle we have cat's paw. It's one of the important dagger that is used by Arya Stark to kill the Night King, and this is the dagger that bears Aegon's prophecy that one day the ice and the fire will merge. And in comparison, I tried to put Excalibur, a sword that is very famous for ages and through myth and legends, something that is the one which imbued with magic and the power to kill. So Excalibur, as we all know, comes from one of the most magical swords. And as we see in the book, it says, "Qui la voit quand Excalibur, la meilleure épée qui faste, qui est le tranche ferrant fust." So, for at his belt hung Excalibur, the finest sword there was, which sliced through iron as through the wood. So this is the history that I tried to bring about of Excalibur, which King Arthur uses, and it has great power. And Arthur slew hundreds of his enemies through this. And Excalibur is illuminated, just like the onstage version of Valerian steel. So about the Valerian steel, Martin says, Valerian steel was manufactured in the Valerian freehold, spell forged with the assistance of dragons and dragon flame. The costly material came even more expensive when the method of making new Valerian steel was lost with the doom of Valeria, and existing weapons became highly treasured and extremely rare. It is this weapon which can kill the White Walkers. So this is the weapon. This is the only weapon that exists other than the raw form, which is dragon glass and dragon fire, that can kill the White Walkers. So we see a veritable collective unconsciousness and a veritable connection between the archetypal Excalibur and the Valerian steel. So Valerian steel swords are quite rare in Martin's world. There are only 227 of them are existent. Rest are lost. And of them, Martin could find few of them as the one which can actually kill the White Walkers, the archetype of fear. Bright Roar, Long Claw, Red Rain, Lady Forlorn, Nightfall, Dark Sister, Widow's Wail, Heart's Bane, Ice, Blackfire, Oathkeeper, Lamentation, Vigilance, Orphan Maker, Truth. So the naming of the sword is also a very symbolic manifestation of the attachment that the wielder has with the sword. So now, the famous fighting sequence, which we see in Game of Thrones, and is a reminiscent of the sagas like Dana saga in East, half Dana saga, East Temsonor. And in that, we see the description of how Agnar defeats the other. And we have the language where Agnar, son of Ragnar, is the one who is a half Dan and goes on to kill and follows the archetypal fashion of Sigmundur. So Agnar sono Ragnar lagriski pisino amot hafdani oka varu pierre vir skipti al hosteling. So this is how the description goes, where the fight takes place. Now, again, in Grettir's saga, we have the battle between Glamour and Grettir. Glamour is again the archetypal fear, the other, and somebody who is very difficult to kill. And Grettir has to come up with a very difficult method of slaying Glamour. And the description of Glamour, as I have given in the Grettir saga, matches very closely to that of the White Walkers. Glamour for a ciento ogo ritest up an han omcom dirnar. And this is how he goes on exclaiming the great power of the Glamour's eyes, where he says, Glamour hank anada sin mikolu fastara og biafristi havra filirum durin. So his eyes are very important, and it emanates a kind of a seductive glare. To anybody who tries to attack him gets frozen, very much like Medusa, and very much again that is being used by the White Walkers. Now, if we come to Grendel in the Beowulf, we see a similar description of the others. The one who lives in a land beyond, and he is in Old English, he's called Fiend on Hell, that is a fiend from hell, and his famous was described as Grimagheist, a grim ghost. So this is the Old English language version of it. Iadelich od date an on gun Frianna Freeman Fiend on Hell Weisse Grimagheist. Hen Grendel hatten mir skapta se pe mohas hiold fien und fasten fiffel sign hard. One side where Viakdol, Hivil, Sipandan, Him, Skipenden, Forskrifan, Hafdi in Kans Kan. Now, I have tried mathematical analysis to try and find out the quotient of how Martin is treating human beings versus the human beings versus these supernatural creatures. So I have tried to give a diagram with a circumscribed circle and two triangles where AB is equal to life and BC is equal to death. AD is Wudish Licht, the white light, that is the power of goodness, and DC is the Dunkels Licht, the dark energy of the others. And as we know, angle ADC is twice the angle of ABC. Thus, Martin's world show that the angle of our residence, which is obviously ABC, is with our transient life, and the dragons and the White Walkers and the others reside in the angle ADC, which occupies twice in terms of space and of our residence. So, Beowulf's famous fight with the dragon is something that is influential and something that is present mostly in the subconscious ideologue of the writers. And this is the fight that I've tried to describe. And finally, I come across, how much time do I have? Can you just tell me a bit? Anybody, please?
You have around.
Excuse me?
You have around 5 more minutes.
Okay, thank you. I try to maintain the time. Yeah, so the idea of Yggdrasil is something that is very important in medieval history, because Yggdrasil is the tree that connects with all living energies. So on one side, you have the White Walkers who are the dead energy, necro energies. They have the necropolitical energy. And on the other side, you have the living energy in the form of Yggdrasil, something that connects all living being into an energetic conduit. And in this particular series of Martin, Song of Ice and Fire, as well as in the TV series, we have the use of weirwood, which have a similar function. So what are weirwoods? Weirwoods have the 5-pointed leaves. 5 is again a very important symbol of paganism, that is of the inverted pentagram. Which is obviously much vilified during the Christian Inquisitions. The 5-pointed leaves and the sap of the weirwood are blood red, while smooth bark on the white trunk and woods are bone white. Most weirwood have faces carved into their trunk. This was done by the children of the forest in ancient days and is now done by the free folk as well as the other descendants of free men, as followers of the old gods in the 7 kingdoms, praying to heart trees in the gods' wood. In some case, sap has collected in the crevice of the carved faces, giving the trees red eyes, which have been known to drip sap as if trees wing. And weirwood will live forever if undisturbed. So you have famous instances of weirwood as in the Winterfell. In the God's wood, we have weirwood as a symbol of a sacred tree, and it's followed. It's being followed by the children of the forest worship, and the weirwoods bear witness to an important ceremonies such as marriages, oaths, and everything. So, in conclusion, I like to end this paper by trying to say why and what are the end product of my research. So finally, number one, the archetype of fear that is there in the form of Grendels and glamour is coming through the ages, and phobia is the reason the heroes are required. And that is one of the very important point that I tried to raise. Second, very importantly, is the otherworldly creatures and their relation with human are based on mutual distrust. And even though Daenerys Targaryen actually rides dragon, very few actually can establish connection with the dragons after the fall of Valyria. And obviously the White Walkers are non-negotiable. And thirdly, I tried to use how White Walker can kill. It's the connection of the blade, the magic imbued within the blade that is coming from the archetypal ideas of Excalibur to the Valyrian steel. And my final part of the paper was how Yggdrasil, the famous icon archetype of spirituality and the guide to performative in the use of weirwood by Martin. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Debojyoti, for your paper. We seem to be having an issue because one of our panelists has not logged in. And Jan mentioned that he will join us in a moment because he's dealing with some issues at home. So in the meantime, we can maybe deal with some questions if you have questions or comments for this interesting paper. I would like to check the chat with the participants, and if there are not questions for now, then maybe I can ask the first one. As you mentioned in your paper, Martin seems to be using a series of archetypical ideas in order to create his world and communicate certain notions regarding fear, light, dark, etc. But we also know that Martin also inspired his work on a particular historical phenomenon, which is the War of the Roses. So I wanted to ask you, how do you see like this confluation between the archetypes that you see in his work with also the historical material that he's drawing from to create his universe? I think we lost him.
We might lost him, but Jan Kremer says that he's already ready. So
okay, I think we lost him. So let's then move to the next paper, and we can then come back to the question. So Jan, if you want to, feel free to share your screen and unmute yourself, and then we will move on with your paper. In the meantime, I'm going to introduce Jan. So Jan is a PhD student at the Faculty of Education at Charles University and CEFRES, French Research Center in Humanities and Social Sciences in Prague. His PhD thesis is dedicated to digital medievalisms within the Czech historical culture. He works at the Center for Medieval Studies at the Institute of Philosophy, Czech Academy of Sciences. Recently, he became the lead coordinator of a digital games archiving project at the National Film Archive in Prague, and he is the founding member of the Central and Eastern European Historical Games Collective. So Jan, thank you for being here, and the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you very much, Juan. Thank you for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to talk about my part of my PhD thesis. First of all, I have to emphasize that in 20 minutes time, I can only scratch the surface of such a complex topics like the Czech historical culture or staging of history in Kingdom Come, Deliverance. Okay, a Czech digital game, a realistic first-person simulation. It looks like this, published by Warhorse Studio in 2018. So I will commit some major simplification along the way. The story of Kingdom Come Deliverance takes place in a peripheral part of central Bohemia along the Sázava River, consisting of 16 square kilometers. It is the year 1403 AD, some 16 years before the Hussite Wars, when the Bohemian king Wenceslaus is imprisoned by his brother Hungarian king Sigismund, and Sigismund and his Cuman army invade Bohemia, defended by a group of Bohemian lords still loyal to Wenceslaus. The main protagonist is Henry, a blacksmith's son whose parents were killed by the Cumans, and his player's goal is to fight the invaders in the name of the rightful ruler and avenge his family, which are two main goals of the game, supported by 8 hours of cutscenes, embodied in the official tagline Rex familio ulcia, so the king, family, and revenge. Henry enters the service of the Bohemian lords, and it is later revealed that Henry is a bastard son of one of the knights fighting against Sigismund. So Henry is on the right and his father on the left. The game drew attention even before it was released, mainly for two reasons. The first being statements and public appearances of its creative director, Daniel Vávra, where he promoted his conservative political views. I have no time to go into details, but I will mention one controversy that resonated in the Western media. In a Twitter debate, an American game journalist, Arthur Gies, claimed that there were no people of color living in medieval Central Europe, where Daniel Vávra strongly disagreed. In my opinion, the significance of this argument is not the question about POCs itself, but rather the fact that A, Daniel Vávra argues he knows better because he was born in the Czech Republic, and B, that we even accept an intense and in fact a historiographical discussion when dealing with a digital game. The second reason why Kingdom Come drew attention was its accuracy claim. So this is from the website, official website of the game. Warhorse Studios promoted the game and as historically accurate and realistic based on historical and archaeological research. This also became one of the main selling points of the game. The backlash soon followed. Game historian Jan Heinemann called Kingdom Come ironically the most authentic historical game of all times. Some Western game journalists identified it as a myth-making or as an impossible quest for historical accuracy. And German game magazine GameStar even hired a group of medievalists to fact-check the game. Obviously, they did it without really playing it. Finally, German game historian and medievalist Aurelia Brandenburg described the Middle Ages constructed here as an imagined national romantic, male-dominated and non-queer idyll, which is during the plot of the game threatened by evil strangers from outside, led by a foreign king. There is no doubt that the historical realism claim played a big role in the commercial success of the game, as the developers themselves acknowledge. But it also puts the developers and especially the only historian, Joanna Novak, in their team in often difficult and somehow weird situation. So in 2018, talking to in English to The Verge online magazine, Novak stated, "I truly believe that people will be much more interested in not just Czech history, but history in general, and want to dig into it more after they play our game, because they will feel it. This is something different from what they were told in school. It's like a modern interactive museum." But few months later, when talking to a different audience, the Czech history students in Brno, she said, "Kingdom Come is not an open-air museum, it's not a medieval simulator, nor a game suitable for education about the Middle Ages." It has to be added that such problems are common even for the other game developers, especially those creating realistic reconstructive simulations, according to epistemological terminology of Adam Chapman. The other developers, like, for example, in this case, Ubisoft, just navigate the minefield of accuracy and authenticity in their marketing more carefully, and they don't openly promise historical accuracy. Kingdom Come is a Czech product made by predominantly Czech developers. Moreover, the main purpose and goal of Kingdom Come, as stated many times by Daniel Vávra, was to promote Czech history abroad, that is, our history. Since the Czech historians were kind of cut from the world, there was no one to tell our history, so basically we are using pop culture to spread the word, or in another quote, we created something that defines even our national culture. This mission was accepted and celebrated by both Czech media and Czech players. So this is a screenshot of a of the biggest online shop in the Czech Republic, where you can read that the Kingdom Come Deliverance brings a feeling of national pride and a story that could happen to any one of your predecessors living in the Middle Ages on our territory. Thus, I have an exceptional opportunity to analyze Czech context of the game, that is the Czech historical culture shared by Czech developers, journalists, and players. This can allow us to expand the already mentioned conclusions of game historians and medievalists. Not only we will know how the Middle Ages in Kingdom Come looks and plays, but also why it was created like this in the first place. This approach corresponds with the goal defined already by contemporary historical game studies, for example, in this case, Eugen Pfister and Felix Zimmermann, as they say, from a historical perspective, it is therefore more productive to look at the context in which games were created and to ask why certain settings, statements, and forms of presentation dominate or have dominated. Why do we focus on this or that historical period, group, or person and ignore the others? What does that say about our popular and memory culture and about our society? For the first phase of my analysis, which I want to present to you today, I have focused on a topic mostly omitted by the reviews and public debates. That is the ludic construction of religion and spirituality and their representation in architecture and NPCs. So about architecture, my analysis of architecture is in a way fact-checking the game. On contrary, I want to follow the method of the developers, which is the historical reconstruction based on the contemporary research. So according to official paratext of Warhorse Studios, dedicated a tremendous effort to the research of weapons and armors, and even architecture and settlement layouts in the region. So this is the town of Rataj. This is again a phenomenon well known from the game industry and described by Nico Norden, for example, as a material fixation of the developers. Also, the possibility to visit Czech historical monuments depicted in the game has a huge influence on Czech gamers. It not only creates a sense of pride, but also supports the claim for historical accuracy. Thus, considering the religious elements in Kingdom Come, it is very surprising that the developers omitted the only two surviving monuments of church architecture still preserved with their original decoration within the game map until today. The first one is the Church of St. James the Greater in Rovná, appears in the game, but the player for unknown reasons can't really enter the church to see its original religious paintings. Okay, this is the contemporary situation. And the second one, even more surprising, is the absence of the chapter hall in the monastery of Sázava. Not only it is one of a kind Gothic monument built and decorated by the masters who came from Prague, but it is the second most religious space in every monastery right after the conventional church. Big part of everyday activities of the monks took place just inside the hall. Okay? And it obviously was part of the plans, because we can see it in the art book, but it disappeared in the game. The developers also ignored a religious building that stood and is archaeologically recorded next to the monastery church. Okay, this is one on the left, when you can see only the walls. Probably a house for pilgrims who visited the cave of St. Procopius, the patron saint of the monastery, who is also mentioned in the game. Absence of this building highlights the omission of the whole pilgrimage culture that shaped the Sázava monastery and its wealth. While the developers ignored some of the most important religious monuments, even though they are at hand, they also ignored crucial religious elements of the medieval region they so meticulously tried to reconstruct. Even more striking are the religious elements or the lack thereof in the lives of NPCs and in the main narrative and the side quests. In the introductory story during a feast with the Bohemian lords, we meet a parish priest of Rataj. This is the guy on the right. He is immediately introduced as an intolerant and repulsive person. and is put in his place by one of the noblemen who compares him to a pig and tells him that because he is eating food provided by the Lord, he should not preach to them. And this is the guy on the left, who is modeled after Daniel Vávra, the creative director of the game. On the other hand, a poor priest of Úžic, Godwin, is depicted as a good friend of the player character. In widely commented quests, they get drunk together, then gamble, brawl with the village bailiff, climb to the church tower in the middle of the night, ring a bell, and finally they have sex with 2 women in a very naturalistic scene, at least for mainstream AAA game. And the only longer dialogue on religious matters in the whole basic game also happens during the above-mentioned drinking scene. Godwin explains that the reason for the late medieval church crisis happening in Bohemia is the wealth of the prelates. When asked if he is not a hypocrite, because he drinks and has sex with women, he answers simply no. In spite of these facts, or maybe because of them, Godwin later serves as a spiritual mentor of Henry. In the quest concerning Waldensians, heretics, he seems to be tolerant. In the quest with an old lady haunted by a ghost, Godwin proves to be rational, both very modern characteristics for a person. Part of the narrative takes place in a Sázava monastery, Sasau, itself, when the player's character becomes a monk. However, Henry never learns anything about the meaning of the monastic life. He only mechanically repeats few empty activities. Even during the entrance ceremony, when Henry needs to repeat the words of a psalm, the agency is taken away from the player and the religious ritual is shown in a cutscene as a humorous stuttering. After all, the monastery as a whole is constructed as a pure Foucaultian institution which mostly disciplines and punishes. All novices were sent here because of their previous wrongdoings or are hiding there because of necessity. In the cloister, they are further bullied by circators, monastic policemen who beat the inobedient monks with their canes, but who secretly drink wine in the cellar. Furthermore, the abbot, head of Sasau, keeps records about the novices where he evaluates their background and prospects. There is no place for piety or contemplation. Thus, the Benedictine monks in Kingdom Come discuss the matters of the faith much less. For example, so the Benedictine monks in Kingdom Come discuss the matters of the faith much less than, for example, Viking Eivor in Assassin's Creed Valhalla, who frequently talks about her beliefs, which she compares with the Christian ones. The lack of religious content does not concern only official church, but relates to spiritual and supernatural matters in general. A side quest, Playing with the Devil, introduces 3 women who bought a magical ointment to meet their murdered families. When the player confronts the herbalist who sold them the drug, she explains that the visions caused by the ointment are the results of a special mixture of herbs, and expresses concerns that the women could harm themselves while intoxicated. The herbalist thus seems very down to earth and rational. She does not mention any invocations or spirits. In general, when an NPC in Kingdom Come believes in supernatural of any kind, then she or he is mostly depicted as a feeble-minded person. Thus, the majority of NPCs possess a very modern, rational, and materialist common sense. Now, the question is why the digital game, which knowingly tries to depict the time of a clear religious crisis, a situation shortly before the outburst of the Hussite Wars, one of the greatest religious conflicts in the Middle Ages, suppresses or completely omits significant or meaningful representations of religion. The explanation is rooted in the Czech historical culture manifested in popular history, which is deeply anti-clerical. As the medievalist Petr Čornej explains, already the historians of the so-called national revival of the 19th century interpreted the Hussite Wars as the apex of Czech national history while suppressing their religious character. The historical novelists of the late 19th century promoted it as a purely national and political conflict. So Czech versus Germans, like in Kingdom Come, Bohemian lords versus Cumans, in which the Czechs triumph during the Hussite Wars. The historical movies made during the communist regime after 1948 further added the revolutionary social aspect, so poor peasants against wealthy church, and presented the Hussites as a kind of proto-communists who are a logical result of historical evolution. Okay, I have a poster from 1950s, because you can see a communist soldier, and behind him is this tradition of Hussite soldier. The crucial religious aspect of the Hussite movements further disappeared. Even now, it remains only in the unpopular scholarly works of the medievalists. Thus, the developers of Kingdom Come and Czech players were raised with movies where medieval clergymen were depicted as either Machiavellian villains, as this one, or gluttons and adulterers, as this one. In all cases, immoral characters who don't really believe what they preach. And yes, they are documents confirming many irregularities in the medieval Bohemian church, but those are recorded just because they are irregular, so we know of them, like the Acta Correctoris Cleri. Even Daniel Vávra, a creator or director at Warhorse and political conservative, often uses the communist movies from the early 1950s about Hussites as a reference for Kingdom Come and praises their director, also named Vávra, for historical accuracy in some aspects. Finally, I have found but one extensive designer's statement about the religion. In 2015, Martin Klima, the executive producer and co-founder of Warhorse, during a public lecture explained his vision of medieval religion in what we can call the fitness club theory. In this metaphor, the clergy acts as the modern owners of fitness clubs that provide opportunity to improve people's health. Their service is beneficial, but also costly, and the profit goes into their private pockets. Some of the fitness clubs owners cheat, some of them exploit their customers, and some are just honest businessmen. The medieval laymen then act as the modern people visiting fitness clubs. They know that visiting fitness clubs is healthy and will extend their life. Some of them even spend most of their time there, but still the majority often avoid it or do unhealthy things because they are fun. In general, the relation of the medieval people to the religion and the church is the same as of the modern people to the fitness clubs. It is something uncomplicated and given, something which they don't debate or question on everyday basis. Though it may sound comically, to us medievalists, this metaphor is a great insight into the Czech historical culture, as the Czech Republic is one of the most atheistic states in the world. It explains why the religious aspect of the Middle Ages stays unknown to the developers and players. So to conclude, the recent studies has confirmed that Czechs identify the Middle Ages as the most celebrated era in history, in their history. This is due to a constructed continuity of identity between the Bohemian Kingdom and contemporary Czech state, but also because it is safely distant to serve as a project screen for national imagination. So the time of Charles IV is really far away, so we can imagine whatever we want in this time. Kingdom Come Deliverance draws cleverly and functionally, both knowingly and unknowingly, from Czech historical culture. Thus, the players perceive its construction of the past as authentic because they know it from the popular history, and as based on solid evidence because they can still visit its monuments during a weekend. Then it came as no surprise when a game entitled Kingdom Come, name which comes from the Lord's Prayer, mostly avoids religious elements. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Jen, for your paper. This was very interesting, and I'm sure there are going to be lots of questions about it. Finally, we have our final panelist. I'm going to give you co-host, right? So you can unmute yourself and you can share your screen. Cullan Bendig is a master's candidate at the University of Texas at Austin with the Department of Slavic and Eurasian Studies and the Lyndon B. Johnson School of Public Affairs. He is interested in the use of public history memory in modern East Central Europe with an emphasis on the Czech lands in digital media. He hopes to continue building upon these research questions after graduating this spring. So Cullan, the floor is yours. The title of his paper is Hussite Video Games and Czech Digital Nationalism. So again, the floor is yours. You have 20 minutes. Take it away.
Great. Thank you so much. I believe that should be, yes. Okay. So Giannis teed up my presentation very well because I'm also talking about Kingdom Come Deliverance, primarily. Although I will be taking more of a foreign perspective on Czech nationalism. How do non-Czechs receive the Czechness as it's presented in the game? As 16 industry organizations convened in 2018 to hold the inaugural Central and Eastern European Gaming Awards in Poznan, Poland, those involved commented on the significance of creating a regional award for digital games from East Central Europe. In a promotional video for the first SIGA ceremony, one developer remarked that Central and Eastern Europe, quote, has a rich history, which is an enormous source of inspiration and has a great talent pool. Many ambitious and talented people are working really hard to show that things that are exceptional worldwide. And this sentiment was not unusual. Participants at the awards routinely expressed that they were proud not only to draw on the history of their region as inspiration for their games, but also to make histories from their region known to the world by means of this technology. Czech developer Dan Vavra boasted in the same promotional video that, quote, it is good to take your heritage and promote your own culture, which could be quite interesting in the West. Well, another developer observed at the after party for the gala that we are only scratching the surface here with the subjects that we can introduce from our region that will soon enter the cultural discourse. So for these developers, creating digital games was an opportunity to see their own historical memory represented within a global cultural imagination. Kingdom Come Deliverance, as we all know now, was released on February 13th, 2018 by Warhorse Studios, a Prague-based digital game studio founded by the aforementioned Dan Vavra. Kingdom Come Deliverance, or simply KCD, is a first-person game set within the Kingdom of Bohemia at the beginning of the 15th century. The plot revolves around a rural blacksmith's son who tries to survive one of the many civil wars that consumed the House of Luxembourg after the death of Bohemian King and Holy Roman Emperor Charles IV. Which, to grossly oversimplify, as I'm sure I don't need to do for a medievalists conference, but the Bohemian Reformation and the other socio-political woes of the time would lead to the Hussite Wars just 10 years after the game is set, a little over. And the game is full of references to these events. Even you, as the player, having you deliver a Hussite sermon to cover for a priest who hung over after a night out drinking with you. This is the Father Godwin quest. So this game comes out in February 2018, and by March of 2018, historical documentary style videos about the Bohemian Reformation and the Hussite Wars began to be posted on YouTube by popular historical content channels for the first time. This wave of references to events from the Kingdom of Bohemia grew as the Swedish game developer Paradox Interactive added Hussite as a religion to their game Europa Universalis 4 in 2020. And in 2021, the Bohemians were introduced as a playable civilization to the popular medieval real-time strategy game Age of Empires 2 for the first time. A Czech-made game set during the Hussite Wars titled 1428 Shadows over Silesia was released last year, and another called Songs of the Chalice is currently in development. And so as these figures from Czech national mythology subjects enter a wider historical consciousness, they are also reflected in the mass participatory content created by digital historical enthusiast communities, such as documentary videos, user modifications to published games or mods, and historical memes. And so in less than a decade, what was at best a marginally known episode in late medieval history outside of specialists or Czechs, it has become this familiar reference to a global audience of historical content creators and video game enthusiasts. So in this presentation, I'm going to discuss how the Czech digital nationalism presented in Kingdom Come: Deliverance was an entry of the Hussite national mythology into global public historical memory through the medium of digital historical games. Drawing on theoretical concepts from the fields of cultural memory studies and historical game studies, I first discuss how Czech national myths are places of memory and consider how those places are represented in digital games released prior to 2018. And then I discuss how the structural characteristics of Kingdom Come: Deliverance afford narratives differently to Czech players and those who are unfamiliar with reading these local cultural narratives. Ultimately, I argue that the elements of Kingdom Come: Deliverance's open Ludo framing narrative, which drawing on concepts of Adam Chapman's work on game studies, these resonate within cultural memory of Czechs and simultaneously enable global audience to receive a specific national medievalism as an authentic and accurate depiction of history as it aligns with their own understanding of a mythologized past.
Cullan, I'm sorry. I just wanted
Yes.
you finish changing your slides because we are stuck in the first one.
This is the only slide I have. I don't have
Okay,
a
that's
full.
right.
So before discussing this, talking about the terms that I'm going to be using to just think of how digital historical games produce these narratives. Interactivity is the defining feature of the medium. The fact that digital games are defined by player agency within the space of the game that emergently shapes narratives they receive is distinct from other forms of how medium produce narratives through audience participation. Affordances, of course, comes from ecological psychology and with James Gibson. And the idea of an affordance is that it is what an environment offers to an animal, what it provides or furnishes either for good or evil or ill, excuse me. And what's important about that is it centers the animal's body in relationship to the environment to avoid techno-determinism or placing the player's own agency at the heart of every narrative decision. It considers the two in interaction. So the interactivity of a game medium is best understood through this concept. So in terms of game studies, what this allows is a way to understand the relationship between the player's actions and the game environment without privileging one over the other. In the words of Jonas Linderoth, who was first to apply affordance to digital games, gameplay is to perceive, act on, and transform the affordances that are related to a game system or other players in a game. And it is through this interaction of player with the game's affordances that we get ludonarrative, and I'm using Adam Chapman's definition of this, which is how the player understands the gaps they navigate between the interactive narrative elements of the game world or lexia and the objects presented to them by the developer, i.e. the framed narrative. So moving on to countries of the former Eastern Bloc have contributed to the global gaming industry since its earliest days. But in the late 1980s and 90s, developers from post-socialist countries were in no position to keep up with Western game studios as the home computer revolution led to an explosion of digital games. Still, there were many East Central European developers who did produce games, obviously, but most of them had deep historical resonance with Western stereotypes of Eastern Europe. When they are attempts to represent local culture, these games are either somewhat aligned with Western stereotypes or just fully participate in them. For example, from the genre of city building games like SimCity or City Skylines, there's also an equivalent, Workers and Resources Soviet Republic, which is a Slovak game that sort of that uses local culture to take traditional genre tropes but then frames them differently for market effect and novelty, but also as a representation of their own space. You can build a lot of buildings from Bratislava that are not marked that way in the game, but if you've been to Bratislava, you recognize, oh, that's the TV station, as just the generic TV station that you can build. And just at this moment, I'd like to clarify that when I'm referring to the absence of Czech narratives in digital games, I'm not implying that Czechs were not making their own games with their own narratives. There's some excellent work by Jaroslav Švelch on this. Gaming the Iron Curtain addresses it. But so what I'm saying is, when I say Czech cultural memory did not exist in games before Kingdom Come: Deliverance, I'm specifically referring to gaming as a mass-produced commodity with global distribution that influences a forming public historical memory. So within the wider gaming industry, Czech digital game developers have produced several quite well-known series, such as the first two Mafia games developed by Take-Two Czech from 1998 to 2017, and Bohemia Interactive's Arma franchise. While both games are successful and well-regarded by their respective communities, neither game space is situated locally within a Czech story. Mafia 1 takes place in fictional Lost Heaven, Illinois, which is a fictional Chicago-inspired Prohibition American city. And Mafia 2 takes place within Empire Bay, which is another fictional American city, primarily based on post-war New York City, which is, of course, the setting of The Godfather. And these games reflect a Czech entry into gaming as more broadly in this global sense through a pre-established public historical memory. But it's further illustrated in the fictional settings of the Arma series, which is developed by a Czech studio, Bohemia Interactive. Most relevant here is Arma 2, released in 2009, a first-person shooter game that falls within the subgenre of FPS games known as milsims, a portmanteau of military simulation, which purports to offer players a realistic simulation of military conflict as possible within a game. The primary setting for the second installment in this series, regarded well for its realism and actually used as, in combat training by some branches of the US Armed Forces, is a fictional East European country named Černá. And the terrain and built environment of Černá resemble a Czech Republic, the part of the Czech Republic where the game was developed, specifically an area of North Bohemia near Ústí nad Labem. The native Cherno-Russian language in the game is identical to Czech. However, most of the road signs are written in Cyrillic, which, in addition to the traditional Eastern Orthodox architectural elements of the church, suggests that Cherno is intended to be interpreted by the player as a generic Eastern European country. Like Agatha Christie's Czechoslovakia or the Marvel Cinematic Universe of Sokovia, Cherno is a fictional country that may as well exist as far as the Western public imaginary is concerned. And what Kingdom Come: Deliverance then offers is a similar kind of experience of a mediated Bohemia to a foreign audience that may as well exist as far as they are concerned. If you've ever been to rural Bohemia, the built environment and digital space which the player navigates certainly resonates well as the Czech countryside. Wide slow rivers flowing around rolling hills, fields and forests, and it often feels as if you're in sort of a living museum, sort of those reconstructed, reenactor-based heritage museum experiences. And this is also reflected in some of the tropes present in the game that present Czechness. Language use and accents as well signify social status and class, but there's also what appears to audiences a somewhat, without any sort of local context, a rather peculiar decision to have German characters in the games use German accents. There's a character in Skalitz at the beginning of the game whose name is Deutsch, who speaks with a German accent, and he gets himself in trouble by miring himself in the Western Schism, siding with the Avignon papacy against the Pope, which causes the good Czechs in the game, rather than who support, of course, Václav IV's backing of the Rome papacy. His wife, however, in the game is Czech and does not speak with a German accent. Their son, who's raised in the same town as your character and grew up with you, is considered German by his father's origin, and he also speaks with a Czech accent. And this sort of reflects this narrative framing of Czech history started with František Palacký during the National Revival of the history of the Czech nation in the Bohemian lands as an eternal struggle between Czechness and Germanness. And you as the player then participate in that struggle by throwing cow manure at the freshly whitewashed Deutsch's house as revenge to support your king. You also play as Henry, a blacksmith's son from Silver Scallots. And the character's name is Henry. The whole game is in English. And you have this kind of Anglo-Germanic bent of the naming convention throughout the game. The Vltava River is the Moldau. Henry's love interest is Teresa, not Teresa. The Lord of Rate, not Rataya, is Hans Capon, not Jan Ptacek. And the game itself was released in English. Most of the voice actors are British, with some Americans in there for the characters who are coded as the more rough and ready ones. The sergeants in every castle are both voiced by Americans, as well as Father Godwin. And I can't help but assume that that was somewhat deliberate. And then the game also codes class and social status with British accents, drawing on this very Tolkienian high fantasy trope of higher, more posh British accents being used for the aristocracy, and bandits on the road using more Cockney accents. And so while this setting affords resonance within Czech cultural memory, it also happens to afford resonance within this global cultural memory of the Middle Ages. But this medievalism is based on this sort of collecting understanding of the Middle Ages as an almost white mythic space. But through gameplay, it gives legitimacy to all of these stories and packages them well for consumption by those who have no, who are lacking the cultural context. And then once it has been packaged well, it can be removed and used similarly to national myths, as the Hussites were made into dehistoricized, unreligious symbols of good Czechness during the national revival. So too are they now made into generic medieval objects through this game, which can then be taken on by a wider audience. And I think I'm going to end there, and just end with a brief apology because time zones are hard and I misunderstood when I was presenting. So thank you for your time and attention.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Cullan. So those are our 3 papers. Now I'm opening the floor for Q&A. We have around 20 minutes. So again, remember that if you have any questions, you can either write them in the chat or you can raise your hands, and we will let you ask your question directly. If there are no opening questions, then I think I will begin. And I wanted, well, since both Jan and Cullan dealt with Kingdom Come Deliverance, I would like to begin with that. As Jan mentioned, and also, of course, also as Cullan mentioned, part of the polemic around the game is claims to accuracy and to realism. And I found very interesting the Twitter thread that Jan showed, in which the assumption that because I am Czech, I know my history better than you, as a justification for the whole thing. On the one hand, I would like to ask if you know actually of consultations with experts, with Czech experts to some extent in the development of the game, because of course, the lack of religiousness, one can understand it from the national myth that you exposed, but from an academic point of view, one would find it, well, would hope to find it there more prevalently, or mostly in a game that has these high claims of accuracy. That is one side of the question. And the other one, I found this claim of nobody had told our story to be very suspicious, because it's quite the claim to say that nobody has ever told our story. So I would like to ask both of you if you could share your opinions and delve a little bit more into these issues, whichever of you would like to take it first.
I have an answer to the sources. I'm trying to pull it up in my notes. So maybe Jan, if you have something.
So if I do understand it correctly, you were asking for like what is the relation between the historical advisors and the like non-existence of the religion in the game, because like most of medievalists that do study Hussite wars are invested in religious history. this is a kind of a complicated topic because I'm not really feeling like the right person to talk about it because it concerns other people that I know personally. But I would suggest that there was not much cooperation between the advisors and the makers of the game, or at least the advices were not kind of accepted by the developers, which is kind of my explanation. But you have to ask the advisors themselves. I really don't want to talk for them. And the second question about like nobody has told our story so far. Like, first of all, I don't think that the story of early 15th century Bohemia is the story of the Czechs. And so this is the first issue. And the second issue, yes, I think what the developers trying to construct here is that during the communist era, like nobody was able to publish on Czech history outside Czechoslovakia. So maybe like this is what they are referring to, but I also do not agree with this, because at least if we would agree with this concept that at least after the Velvet Revolution, there was a boom of new works published abroad, especially if we are talking about Middle Ages, on the Hussite revolution, like František Šmahel and all the other scholars, including my colleagues now, like most of, for example, the Center for Medieval Studies scholars are interested in religious history of the Hussite Wars. So I can't agree with this thesis. It's yeah.
So of course, I also don't want to speak for the historians they consulted, but I do have in an interview with one of them, 2 years after the game came out, they did sort of a 2-year retrospective stream, and in that, one of them, Joanna Nowak, who's a Polish art historian, she commented on the process of trying to be a historical advisor on this game. And she mentions that at one point, Dan Vavra, the lead developer, wanted to have a big windmill on this hill. It's in the center of the map. And she said, well, there weren't windmills here because you have a river, you don't need it. And he said, yeah, but I want it, put it in. And that's kind of the whole game, I think, ultimately, is they might have had some feedback from historians. I know that they had 7 writers who were largely reenactors, historians, fencers, one on-site historian who's Joanna Nowak, and then they had 20 historical advisors listed in the game, but I don't know if they were... I don't know if these are the authors of books they consulted or if they actually talked to all of them. I know they talked to some, but I can't attest to which ones. And often Vavra gave a talk in 2018 about designing historical RPGs. And every time he mentions these historical reenactors, or sorry, these historians they consulted, he usually brings up, well, the reenactors told us it was different and the reenactors actually where this, like, he does this sort of appeal to, he basically relegates the historians as ivory tower academics and says that reenactors know what's actually going on. And of course, there's a lot of scholarship on reenacting and that sort of presented authenticity that is in one way devoid of politics, which is something else that I think is going on in this game, that it's about the Hussite Wars, but people aren't really political in the game in that they don't have complex ideas, or there's no like tensions in beliefs. It's just survival of the fittest, and we're under attack. They want money from us because we have a silver mine, and that's kind of it. It gets very Game of Thronesy. So I think the historians offer a very like complicated contextualized answer, and they ignore that often in favor of this, well, the reenactors, they stand out in the field wearing reconstructed clothes so they know what it's like, even though there are obviously a lot of issues with that. And then to get to your second question before I take too long, I'm sorry, if you'd remind me what the second question was.
Again, this idea that part of the justification behind the game was nobody has told our history, so we're going to do it through popular culture. Because maybe you can expand on what you just said, right? Like there seems to be then this tension, right? Like there are historians who have probably told these stories. So where does the need to justify the existence of the game through this perspective come from? What would be your opinion?
So I agree with Jan that doesn't make sense academically, because there are quite a lot of people who have talked about in an academic setting that this is not an unknown story or an undiscussed story. But from popular culture, I think it is, insofar as what they're saying. They use this phrase a lot in the advertising for the game, and Vavra mentions this in the 2018 talk I just mentioned. Think of it as Braveheart the game. And I think that what that means, I didn't understand that for the longest time, and I'm not Czech. I've been studying for a while now, but I didn't know originally. And then I watched these Hussite revolutionary trilogy movies, the 1950s Otakar Vavra retelling of the Comrade Hus, Comrade Žižka. And I understood in that moment what they meant, because Braveheart is not, I'm at a medievalism conference. I'm sure we all know how Braveheart, the first thing you see is this title card with a date, and that date is incorrect, and the rest of the movie is not much better. And this movie does this, these games, they do a similar thing to these communist era movies of presenting a narrative that is palatable in the dressing of the past, that gives it legitimacy, because through interaction with it, it feels real, even though the material culture they did spend quite a lot of time on, but the actual narrative underneath it, not so much. And I think that's more what they're talking about, is that people don't know us. They don't know Jan Hus like they know William Wallace, but they don't mean the historical figure William Wallace. They mean our mythologized understanding of this sort of popular culture understanding of Jan Hus.
Yeah.
Right.
If I may add just a small remark. When I was talking about the advisors, I was not speaking about Joanna Novak. Joanna Novak was and is an employee of Warhorse, which is a different thing. I was talking about the people mentioned in the credits. I'm pretty sure those people never played Kingdom Come and maybe never played a historical digital game in their life, which is okay. Which is okay. I'm just saying. And the whole second question, we could like it can take like ages to speak about identity construction, and in the case of Czech Republic and so on. So it's a complicated topic. Sorry.
Right. Again, well, thank you both for your answers. If there are other questions, again, you can feel free to write them down. In the meantime, I will very quickly just go back to the question that I had asked Debojyoti before we lost him. And again, basically my question was that you recognize all these archetypical elements that Martin seems to be using in the construction of his universe, but we also know that he uses historical scenarios to mold his narrative. So I was wondering, how do you see like this combination of the two elements in the creation of the whole setting?
Yeah, hello. I was very sorry that my internet broke that time. Yes, I heard the question. I couldn't answer that. Yes, with Martin, the thing is that he is a very complicated gentleman by large, and when he is using his historical knowledge, it was more of a historicity rather than history per se. He actually did the research, definitely, but his mythologization is based on more of a folklore and not the history as recorded, again with the more of a historicity and more of the folkloric basics, and his knowledge of medievalism was never in question, but what he tried to put forward is a rather a more personal vision of his to that of the medieval times.
Okay, thank you for your answer. We have a question in the chat from James. I think I will unmute you, James, so you can ask it directly, if that's okay with you.
Yep, that's fine. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, so I guess sort of riffing onwards from the last question to you guys, given that both of your work kind of touches on how Vavra and his team sort of reproduce these particular sort of narratives of nationalism, essentially, does that give you any particular insights, either of you, on how we as historians, particularly both in classroom teaching and as public historians, in some of our cases, historians who work with computer game developers, what does that give you in terms of information on what we can actually do with this, whether that's by trying to encourage a kind of wider constellation of narratives so that you don't just have this sort of fairly single track of nationalism, or by making it harder for those sorts of claims of effectively there is this big claim of most accurate game ever, and then this sort of nationalist narrative can be leveraged off of that very effectively. Are there ways that collectively we can make that more difficult for developers to just run with?
Should I start? It's not easy.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to say that, like there are basically two things, it's like we can really divide like the creative director and the game. Still, Daniel Vavra has a nowadays already really wide political portfolio, what he's doing in the Czech Republic, which is one thing. The other thing is like the game itself, which is really a complex, complicated system of, ludonarrative, historical narrative, and so on and so on. So I really want to avoid some, simplistic interpretation of the game. Also, because I'm trying to work on the research of players' reception of the game, and also I sometimes work as a tourist guide in the Sázava monastery where I do special tours for like gamers who play the Kingdom Come Deliverance, and I'm very often amazed how diverse is the group of players of Kingdom Come. How, like the last time I was guiding a family of like 2 kids and a father and a mother, and in the end I was asking the 2 kids, the 2 boys and the father, did you like it? And they said, no, we are not here because of us, but because our mother, because she's playing the game, So it's like it's such a complex issue, to uncover. But what I want to say is, to answer your question a little bit, is that what I see, not only in connection with Kingdom Come, but with all the historical games, that we should start, at the elementary school, high school, to teach the kids, not like which game can teach you, I don't know, about French Revolution, about the Second World War, but how the game constructs history. Okay, and to have kind of this critical take on games, the same that we have on films. Because, for example, if there was a movie called Jan Hus, about Jan Hus, not a long time ago, and you have so many reviews about this movie, how it connects to the Czech tradition, how it connects to scholarly work, and so on and so on. Everybody was criticizing it. But when The Kingdom Come was published, it was mostly how much money it earned, how many copies it sold, and that is a promotion of Czech history abroad. Nobody was really talking about the content of the game, because the journalists, like the mainstream journalists, are not used to criticize a game, because unlike in Britain, for example, when we can talk about BBC or we can talk about Guardian, you have already journalists there full-time who are writing on games and are interested in games. This is not the situation here. So basically most of the players just uncritically accept everything they see in the game, especially when it corresponds with their historical culture or what they see in popular history. So I would say like this critical education, this critical media education is crucial, but not only in the Czech Republic, but all around the world, to really have some chance, to talk about history in games, and not to, say, it's bad, it's not correct, this is what I wanted to avoid, just to understand what it shows us, who shows us the history in the games, how it is constructed, okay? Not to shame the developers, just to explain how it works, if it makes sense what I've just said. Sorry for being too long.
No, I if I can just quickly, I have a similar opinion, I think, to Jan, that I don't want to say this game is, incorrect, although in many cases it does have a clear narrative bent in the presentation of the facts, and that's more, I think, continuing on the last comment, I think the point should be to talk about source analysis, which claims, what the claims are based on, and sort of understanding the whole constellation of factors that go into this. This is something that's been talked about, I know, with Vavra in particular. His sources, when he talks about where he draws from, makes no distinction between 19th century nationalist stories and more modern scholarship. They're all kind of one and the same, and it's just whatever cherry picked from whatever is there to fit the point. But the issue with that, I think, from games is that as gaming communities become more communities of practice online through these like long development cycles, constant updates, Discord servers, Reddits, Twitch streams, all of these things, you get sort of a counter to outside of academia entirely, historical space where people are like doing they're historying, and that they're constructing narratives that they then have all this legitimacy to, because when we've been talking about this, we have a group have come up with this narrative. And if there's any way, I don't have any answers to this, but I think making an interjection into that space, and even just knowing that it exists, and that, if you make another game later that doesn't fit these narratives from before, people might start talking about it online and your game won't sell. So even if you don't buy into these narratives, if you want to make, let's just, for an example, a Hussite game, you want to try to appeal to that currently existing narrative. And I also think the form is important, because I also don't know how much it leaves the game. Because there was that Jan Žižka movie that came out last year. This is by Petr Jakl, I think. I don't know, Jan, do you know what I'm talking about? Yeah. It was released as Medieval in English, which is a terrible title. And it's one of like the 20 worst box office flops of all time. And I think part of that is because there's like the global cultural Hussite now, and then there's also the actual, like the national mythology Hussite, and then the real, of course, existing thing. And I don't know if one goes to the other. Like, just because you played Kingdom Come Deliverance, I don't know if you wanted to go see Medieval, because it doesn't really fit within the narrative the game makes. It's set at a different time and doesn't really talk about that kind of stuff. It was also very Hollywood, and I think that lot cost it legitimacy in some people's eyes. So
Okay.
Yeah, if I may just quickly remark about the Medieval, it's just I had it on one of my slides, I just deleted it, because this is why Medieval was so unsuccessful, because it totally missed the historical culture in the Czech Republic. It was like this action movie from Hollywood, which was totally missing the classical narrative about Hussites and Ježiška, and this is the reason why we totally collapsed and no money. Although Jakl is a good friend of Daniel Vavra's, and Daniel Vavra had a cameo in the movie. So just saying.
Wait, where is he in the movie?
He plays some kind of peasant there or something like this.
Okay, so we have one final question, and I will ask Debojyoti to please address it very quickly because we're running out of time. The question says, I have a question. The use of steel in Game of Thrones also reminds me of Troy. Would you say Valerian steel brings back a Homeric theme of human culture versus the forces of the supernatural? Again, very, very briefly, because we're out of time.
Hello.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think I have one. I saw one question with my name, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah, exactly.
Okay, the question was very intriguing. Thank you, Nishargo, for the brilliant question. But the major difference I have observed between the Greek heroes, starting from the tales of Iliad to Odyssey, is that the naming of the sword is not a kind of thing that was prevalent there. The Greeks definitely fought with the supernatural in their legends and myth, but they are also powerful steels blessed by Hephaestion or blessed by, for instance, Achilles's spear and sword and his shield were all given to him by gods, but the naming of them was not so very popular in the Greek myth. Only in the Arthurian legends and in the medieval do we actually get to find the naming. And what intrigued me is Martin's naming of the swords. Now, as I was telling in the previous question that was addressed to me, that Martin's idea of medievalism was never for me a question. He is very well read, and he continues to research before writing. But what intrigued me is that he did not go to the Grecian culture where the gods were giving the gifts of weapon to the heroes for killing the monsters like Hydra or the Pantheon lion or other supernatural creatures, but the sword is actually manufactured in a magical methodology, yet not given by the superior powers. And every sword is bonded with the wielder. So definitely, if Achilles is using his sword, he is bonded with it, but the bond becomes more established when he's naming them. Achilles never named his sword or spear or his shield. They were beautiful, God-gifted, powerful, good for killing enemies, but the naming of the sword is what always for me have been the thing that Martin's genius has given me, and his historicity of understanding. Did I answer the question properly, Nishargo?
Yes. Okay, so we're going to end our panel there. Again, thank you for all our panelists for your papers. This was very interesting and a very lively discussion. Before we end, we just want to remind all of you that we will resume tomorrow at 9 in the morning Central European time with our second keynote lecture by Dr. Helen Young, entitled Learning About the Middle Ages, Video Games, and as Public History. Again, you can use the same link. It's the same link for the whole of the conference. And we hope to see you tomorrow. Thank you very much and have a nice evening.